Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome, Blog Talk Radio friends and fans out there. I'm starting by telling you that you are listening to the winning book radio show, Off the Shelf. It is a beautiful Saturday. Before I say another word, I forgot all about this until I was listening to the news last night, and I'm glad I heard it. This weekend is daylight savings times in, I would say, most of the United States. So remember, those clocks go forward an hour Saturday night or at least Sunday morning by the latest, or you might end up late to school or late to work. Remember, this weekend, daylight savings time, so push that clock forward an hour, and we'll get to enjoy some sunshine a little bit longer here in the U.S. But I want to welcome you guys to our Saturday, March the 12th show, and I'm very excited. I was telling our guests about today's show because it's a story that's a memoir based out of New York, and I love New York, so I'm excited, and I hope that each of you are too. I want to thank you all for joining us. There is still time, particularly if you're from New York, to go out and tell your friends, your family. Even if you live in New York and you listen to today's show, you may hear something that you're like, oh, or you may hear the author share something that about the city that you want to explore more or for the first time. But there's still time to connect to this morning's Off the Shelf, and you can do so by dialing 347-994-3490. Again, that's 347-994-3490, or you can just put in a search engine, Denise Turney, Off the Shelf. The show will come right up. It should come up on the first page at the very top. And you can connect as well through the chat room. So please go out and tell your friends, especially those who love New York City, to tune in to today's show. I started doing this a couple of weeks ago, and some of the quotes, some of our guests, they have struck them, and I hope with our listeners that you don't only listen to the quote, but you actually think about it and let it have a positive impact on your life. So the quote for today's show is, "There is no elevator to success. You have to take the stairs." There is no elevator to success. You have to take the stairs. And I got to tell you, through all the interviews I've done, not only here at Off the Shelf for going on 12 years, but I've interviewed some phenomenal leaders, people who've worked on multi-billion-dollar projects, who lead their own firms. I haven't heard one of them say there's an elevator to success. We assume that other people had it easy, but they all say they took the stairs too, and some of them say they took some pretty hard stairs. So I encourage you to go after your dreams, even if at times it seems hard. Just keep going. Now, next, how good of a mystery sleuth are you? Every book isn't for everybody, but if you love mystery and you value relationships, not only intimate relationship between a man and a woman who turn out in love pour over me to be soulmates, but there's also a dynamic relationship between these 5 male friends who meet in college. All their backgrounds are different, and also particularly it's the father-son relationship with Raymond and his father in Love Pour Over Me that I think will really, when you see how that relationship changes both of them, you might think about your own relationships and how a very trying, challenging relationship, how it changed you, particularly if you decided at some point not to let it change you for the worse, which is what Raymond does, thanks to Brenda. If you value those types of things, I encourage you to go get a copy of Love Pour Over Me. It's in ebook and print format. And if you don't, it's at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart. If you don't see it on the shelves, just ask the clerk, say, I would like to get a copy of Love Pour Over Me by Denise Turney. And they can special order a copy and call you when it comes in, because Love Pour Over Me is carried by the largest book distributors in the world. So please go get a copy and let me know how you enjoyed the book. And now for what you guys have been waiting for. I want to introduce our very special guest. I am really excited about our show. Again, almost 12 years doing this. We've had every guest has been phenomenal. Our special off-the-shelf guest this morning is Jimmy Newell. I found him doing a search online. It was just something about his book that really pulled at me. Now, Jimmy is a Bronx, New York native, and he's the author of the nonfiction book, A Bronx Boy's Tale. You know, we talk about a lot of fiction here on Off the Shelf, but this is a nonfiction book, A Bronx Boy's Tale. And you can check Jimmy out online at www.jimmynewell.com, and I'll spell that. It's Jimm, like Mary, Jimmy, like Nancy, Newell. So JIMMYNEWELL.com. This is what I love about online radio, as I tell you guys. You can actually go over to his website and check out his website even as you listen to today's show. So welcome to Off the Shelf, Jimmy.
Thank you. Great to be here.
We're excited. We are absolutely excited to have you here with us on Off the Shelf, and I'm so glad that you were able to take time out of your busy schedule to join us here. Now, I love the background at your website, again, JimmyNewell.com. That baseball picture, it really makes you think New York. But can you tell us, for our listeners who go over there, is there a way, Jimmy, to click through the site? I tried to click through it. I said, maybe I just don't know how. I wanted to ask you, is there a way to click through it to explore more of the website? And if not, where can people go to find out more about you online?
Well, the website is still being developed, quite honestly, but my Facebook page is certainly something they can explore. And also, I do write a blog, and I write many short essays on that. And if anybody's interested in reading some of those, you can go to my Jim Newell, the blog post.
Jim Newell, the blog post.
The Newell post. Yeah, there should be a link to my Facebook page from my
your website.
My website, and through the website, through the Facebook page, you can also get to the blog. Okay.
So Facebook, the website, and the blog to our listeners. So, Jimmy, what inspired you to write and share your story about your experiences growing up in the Bronx?
Well, it's funny. I've been writing for a while and just never getting to the point of finishing anything. And I ran across an old friend. I commute on the Long Island Railroad. And this guy comes up to me, and, we start connecting. We remember each other after many years. We went to college together. And he played for St. John's basketball. And he wrote a book about a college basketball player, and he asked me to read it. And as I'm reading it, the light went on. You have to write about what you know. I'm trying to create, this new world. I'm going to write about the world I know. And I went back and I started thinking, and, I still keep in touch with I call them kids. We're all in our 60s. All the guys that I grew up with, and we're friends for over 50 years. And
wow.
I think that's,
oh, my God. That's
special.
Yes. That's like unheard of.
It is. It really is. And I started thinking about them. And we're all pretty special, if I say so myself. I have a friend who's a dean at NYU, another friend who's the president of a bank, another friend who's a Wall Street attorney, another one who's a mechanic technician, and there's doctors and lawyers, and all through this little network of friends that we've had all these years. And I thought, well, let me write about them. I also like telling stories, sometimes to the chagrin of my family and my friends. So I started writing my stories, and I incorporated the stories that I had as a friend growing up with these guys, with my family, with my Catholic schools and the church that we all belong to. And I realized that the Bronx was such a special place to grow up in. And I wanted people to know about that because there was an incident back in the 70s. It was during a World Series game. And the cameras focused on the field. But then all of a sudden it pans out and you see these big tenement buildings in the South Bronx burning. And it left such a terrible feeling to anybody who grew up in the Bronx that this was the image that the country would have of the Bronx. So I wanted to preserve the image of the Bronx that I knew. And that was my real motivation.
Oh, my God, I think that's amazing. I worked with a guy. He said he and his college friends, once a year, they just said they were going to keep in touch, and they would get together once or twice a year and do something. They all went on to do very well, too. But I see it even with my son. He's in his early 20s. And I told him, as much as you play with your friends when you're a kid, that just starts to drift away as you get older. And a lot of people just don't keep in touch with, people who you thought you'd be friends with forever and keeping in touch with, that you spend hours with a day. It is truly amazing, and that's a point when I thought about that quote again, there's no elevator to success. You have to take the stairs. You have to put in the effort to make a relationship good, whether it's a friendship or whatever. It's not just going to happen all on its own. I think that's phenomenal that you and your friends fit. That is phenomenal. Did you, Jimmy? Go ahead.
We all went through different stages in our lives when we're raising our children and trying to improve our careers when we weren't able to get together as much. But now, fortunately, time is something we do have. And there's about 6 of us that get together at least once a year at a friend's house, and we spend a long weekend together. And there's another few of us that live more locally in New York. And we try to get together 3 or 4 times a year for, a holiday cheer or, just going to a ball game. I still go to New York Jet games with my good friend Mike. So, it is a very special thing. And what's really nice about it, we really appreciate what we have. And we don't take it for granted.
Wow. Next I wanted to ask you, okay, so thank you for sharing what inspired you to share your story. Now, for some of our listeners, did you take any writing classes before you sat down and started penning your memoir or your autobiography, or did you just sit down and start writing your story?
I just sat down, quite honestly. I have to credit my oldest son, Sean, because a few years ago, he started writing the sports blog. And it got me to the idea of creating my blog. And the blog was a good thing because I wrote short pieces. I didn't have to sit down and knock out 25 pages. I just wrote short things. And I started writing these stories. And then my wife was trying to encourage me, and she saw something about self-publishing. And I wasn't quite sure how I felt about that. But I put a bunch of my stories together. I sent it to an editor there, and they looked at it, and they said, it looks good. You should continue. And that gave me the inspiration to put everything together. And I would get up early on a Saturday morning, go down to my computer room, and I'd put music on. And that brought me back. The music to me is so evocative. It brings me right back into the room.
Yes.
And I could see my friends and hear the conversations, and I just took it from there.
Wow. What time period for our listeners? New York City, I worked there for over a year, about a year and a half, when I lived in Pennsylvania. And I'm telling you, to our listeners, people come from all over the world. You can hear so many different languages. That is a city, I got to tell you, it is in many ways like a melting pot. You hear so many different languages and the food and just the energy of New York. It would be so packed with not only your commuters who live locally coming in and out of the city to work, or whether they live in New Jersey or coming in from Connecticut or Pennsylvania, but you've got so many tourists. You can't even walk on the sidewalks. There's people walking like at the corner of the street just to get to the train station. I mean, New York, New York. So for those who see it today, and it's just hustle, bustle, fun, every block there's something to do. There's like history on every block. What time period does a Bronx Boys Tale take place? And you talked about the music. What time period does it take place in. And how different was that time, Jimmy, than if you go to New York today?
Well, this is a spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't read the book. The book begins on November 22nd, 1963.
Okay.
And I tell the story of how, and this is a true story. I woke up that morning humming a song, and it was Big D, Little A, Double L A S. Now, don't ask me where I got that into my head, because I was listening to the New York rock and roll radio stations that were playing the Four Seasons and Sam Cooke and all the great rock and roll stars of that era, and just also the beginning of the Beatles. So it starts off on the day that President Kennedy was assassinated. And it brings us through the 70s and to the day that my wife and I got married, September 19th, 1976. And one of the things, I'm an old history teacher. I studied history in college and graduate school, and I taught history for several years. And one of the things I included were the events that we witnessed. And so it brings you through the Kennedy assassination, the arrival of the Beatles, the explosive nature that they brought at a time when we were in the doldrums after such a state of national depression after Kennedy's death. And then all of a sudden these four guys from England come, and all of a sudden we're yelling and screaming. And it was a remarkable thing to go through. And then, of course, you have the other events of the 60s, the Vietnam War, the terrible year of 1968 with the assassination of Dr. King and Bobby Kennedy. And all of that, I'm growing up. I'm going to school, I'm going to college, and I'm trying to find the love of my life. And I guess what I was trying to do was to show the history and what we all were going through. Now, in terms of what New York was like, I guess the most exciting time for me was when I was just out of high school and starting college. That summer, I started working in the mailroom. So I was working in Manhattan. And you would think I was going to say somebody's name that I won't say. You would think I was a billionaire walking the streets of Manhattan. I loved it. I was able to go out. I was making messenger calls, delivering documents to different places. It was such a great place to be. And as we talked, too, about the Yankees and all, it was also a great time of excitement for football with the arrival of Joe Namath. So it has a little bit of everything for the sports fan, for the historian, and for people who want to know what growing up in New York was like.
This is a real treat to our off-the-shelf listeners. And the book opens, as he says, November 1963, and he touches on Jimmy Newell, the author of A Bronx Boy's Tale, on so many significant events, some that continue to impact the U.S. even today. I was going to ask you, 1963, so you were a teenager, I'm assuming, when the book opens?
That's correct.
And do you share experiences, just your own experiences you had, or do you also share experiences that your family and friends had as well during this time period?
I spend a lot of time talking about my family because they were an integral part, obviously, of my education and coming to maturity. I spend a lot of time talking about my mother. There's a very good story about my mother, and it also takes place in 1963. And, I'm an 8th grader now. I'm 13 years old. I don't want to be a mama's boy, So we had a tradition of going down to see the Rockefeller Christmas tree, St. Patrick's Cathedral, during the Christmas time. And this one time, now I'm 13, and I have plans to go out with my friends and the girls, so I wasn't too keen about going with my mother. And then all of a sudden, she knows what's going on. You can never pass anything through, by her. And so I get up that morning. We were supposed to go, and I make believe I'm not feeling well. And she was rolling her eyes. She knew exactly what was up. So anyhow, I realized I can't disappoint my mother. So we go down to Manhattan, and we have the best day ever. It's something I remember to this day. And, it was such a poignant tale, I think. I think people will enjoy the sentimentality of that one event. But my two brothers were very important in my growing up. One of the things I've given a few walking talks, and I start off by saying it all started in Apartment 6, 1261 Leland Avenue in the Bronx. And my mother and father raised a family of 5 children in a 2-bedroom apartment that was really small. And, we talk, my brother and I talk about it today. We think my mother must have been a miracle worker, But it has all the, the sentiment of growing up in a big family.
Oh, can you tell us, because a lot of our listeners, some of them may have gone to Catholic school and some may not, and especially I think a lot of people's views of the church has changed over the years, but what was different about attending school at Blessed Sacrament? I have a friend who's Catholic, and he's told me stories about how things were, and very different. He said, man, if you misbehaved, those nuns could, you think they were going to tear the skin off your knuckles, hitting you with those rulers. I was going to ask you, what was different about attending school at Blessed Sacrament when you were 13?
Well, at the time, you were always on the edge. You were leery. You were worried about, because we all heard stories as we're coming up the ranks. You start off in first grade and you hear about this nun or you hear about this teacher from the older friends and my older family. So, you didn't step out of line. And there was none of that, talking back to teachers and all. I mean, that just didn't occur. But for the most part, it was, looking back, it was an environment where you learned, and they wanted order in the classroom. That was key. You didn't talk out, you didn't yell and scream, you didn't, the teacher was always right. So you didn't have parents complaining that their son or daughter failed the test and blaming it on the teacher. That sounds a little different today. But it was, I'm not going to say that you didn't have a little fear. You really did. But it wasn't anything, there's been so many terrible stories about what went on. And that was also one of my motivations. Because I had good experience. I had really good friends who were priests and nuns, and they were terrific. And I worked with them. I also taught at Catholic school. But, of course, there were some terrible, terrible stories that were told. But fortunately, at least my experience was that it was, for the most part, a safe environment. You learned. You had to learn. And the upper grades, I'm going to say the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, were really, I thought they were fun. I had 3 good nuns. They were the only nuns I had, actually. All the other teachers I had were lay teachers. But we had terrific nuns, and the priests that we had were terrific. So it was a great time. It was, in fact, yes.
No, go ahead.
No, in fact, one of the stories I tell, one of the priests was transferred to another parish all the way upstate New York. And one of the other priests who remained organized a bus trip. And they took 3 bus loads of kids up to see the priest who left. And you wouldn't do that if you didn't have fond feelings for them. I mean, you gave up your own time on a Sunday in the summer to go up to see this priest. So he was pretty special to us.
Now, is the L that you caught on Westchester Avenue, is it the same when you say L? Is it the same as a subway? And if not, how
Yes.
is it different? Okay, so it's the same.
Yeah.
It's the same as if somebody called it
It's the
the
same
subway
thing.
now.
We call it the L because it's the elevated portion of the subway.
Okay.
So the subway is in that area of the Bronx is above ground, and then as you get closer into Manhattan, it goes below ground.
Ah, okay. Is baseball your favorite sport? Again, your website at Baseball Picture. Because you didn't really, when I was reading some of your excerpts in your book at Amazon, A Bronx Boy's Tale, it didn't sound like you made much fanfare about the Green Bay Packers playing the Detroit Lions. It was a game that took place around Thanksgiving. I was thinking, wow, the Packers, they were really, really huge. So I said, he might not be much of a football fan. Is baseball like your favorite sport? And what's your favorite team? Are you a Yankees fan? Who's your favorite baseball team?
I am a big Yankee fan. And in fact, I'm down in Florida now with my wife and son, and my son and I are going over to Tampa tomorrow for spring training. So I am a very big Yankee. But it's funny, during that time, there was a transition in New York sports. The Yankees were on the way down, and the New York Jets, the football team, were just beginning. And I have a chapter, One Boy's Heroes, and I talk about how I was such a big Mickey Mantle fan, as everybody in the Bronx was at that time. And then I became such a huge fan of Joe Namath. And it's interesting. I was thinking about this. We have, when you graduate from school, you have these autograph books where you go around, get your friends to sign or the teachers. But you fill it out, and it's a little profile. And I remember this distinctly, and I saw it recently. My favorite sport was football. At the time, my favorite athlete was Mickey Mantle, a baseball player. So I was all over the place. But right now I'm going to say, I'm a big Yankee fan, and I'm also a good New York Jet fan.
Oh man, the Yankees, they're like, yeah, okay now. The Jets, I send you my sympathy.
Well, see, this is what I tell people. They say, "Oh, you're a Yankee fan, you're a front runner." I said, "Yes, but I have balance in my life because I'm also a New York Jet fan." The yin and yang.
Now, can you please describe to us, because they still do people still go by there today, right now during Christmas time. But for those listeners who may never have been to New York, and some who may never get there, can you help them live a little vicariously? Did you go to Macy's during Christmas, and what can you sort of bring that experience to life, the Macy's experience during Christmas? And I also wanted to ask you, was it a bigger attraction back when you were growing up than it is now?
I'm going to say yes, because at the time when I was growing up, Lionel Trains was the PlayStation of the day. That was the big toy. If you were a young boy in the early 60s, you had a set of trains, either a Lionel or American Flyer. It didn't matter which make. And unlike PlayStation and all the video games, the department stores would put up these huge displays of trains. And you would go down there, and your mother would leave you, and she'd go do the shopping, and you would just be right glued to the train layout. And, of course, they would have, window displays and things of that sort. And we would make at least, one trip during the season to see all of the sights of Manhattan. But we also had a Macy's locally, a few blocks from my house, and we would walk there. In those days, they would only be open late at night on Thursday. So we would, take a trip. That was a big thrill, too, to go out after dinner on school night, but your parents would let you go and check out the trains and the decorations, and it was really very special. And unlike today, it used to begin shortly after Thanksgiving. It didn't begin after Labor Day like it does today. So it made it even more precious to us because, it was a short-lived experience.
Mm-hmm. Now, I used to work on Fifth Avenue, and I had to ask you this question. Did you grew up in the Bronx, did you get into Manhattan often because you were young? And I could imagine your parents might have said, no, you can't go down there by yourself. But being that I used to work on Fifth Avenue, can you tell us, what was that area like when you were growing up?
It's amazing. Back in that time, and I'm going to say, by the time I was 13 or 14, your parents would allow you to go into the city because it was a short subway ride. You knew you had to be home at a certain time before dinner or, whatever. And there was just a different feel for the city. You didn't have any worries about, crime or violence or any of that stuff. So we would go down and we would take trips depending on, the mood of the day. Certainly during the Christmas season, you'd go down Fifth Avenue. It was always magnificent. And one of the things that always struck me, you could stand at a corner and you'd see all these people, and all you could see was their heads going up and down as they're walking up and down Fifth Avenue. It was just an amazing sight. And, growing up in that environment, you kind of took for granted that there were a lot of people. But I can imagine for people, coming out from small towns in the Midwest, it had to be frightening to see all those people. It was just an amazing thing. And, the size of the buildings were, just amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's interesting that, you mentioned the elevators. That was one of the thrill, too, going up in we used to go up to 30 Rock and go up to the top of they had a little observation platform that you could go out and see the full range of the city.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a great time. And, one of the things that's interesting, you talked about the melting pot. New York was always an attraction for the new immigrants, whoever they may be and wherever they may come from. And so with all this talk today, it's hard for a lot of New Yorkers to come to grips with what people are saying. That, this is our history. This is what people did. My parents were immigrants. My mother was an immigrant. So, that's what happened. And this is where they came. They came to New York, and they made a place for themselves, and they shared the cultures of so many other different immigrant groups. And
now
it was kind of fun.
There's so much I want to ask you about the Bronx Boys Tale, but you said there wasn't much crime, so your parents would let you go from the Bronx into Manhattan by yourself. But weren't there the gangs? When I say gangs, I'm talking about the mob. They were bigger back then than they are today, right?
I guess so. It's funny because I guess we were kind of insulated from that.
Okay.
I think that kind of gang type of activity was limited to other gangs. They didn't bother 13 or 14-year-olds or working class people. And in some neighborhoods, you'll hear people tell stories that they kept the peace. They kept other criminals from coming into that area. So I guess back in the day there was always crime. I don't want to make it sound like there was no crime, but I guess parents didn't worry about the kinds of things that we have to worry about today.
Mm-hmm.
That certainly is true.
Now, who is the Mick? Who is the Mick, Jimmy?
The Mick is Mickey Mantle.
Oh, okay. See, I when I grew up, I was a huge Cincinnati Reds fan, and I grew up in more the 70s, 80s. But So I was wondering, okay, who is the okay. So he was your favorite. You already told us your favorite baseball player.
He was, yeah.
Did you ever get to meet him? I want to ask you that.
No, I never did, but I came close. My sister's in-laws had a relative who lived in a section of New Jersey where Mickey Mantle rented a house. And we went there and spent the weekend. So I took it upon myself to go to his house. And I'm banging on the door, and nobody came. So I'm guessing he might have been out of town playing the Red Sox or somebody, but he wasn't at the house. But I did try.
Oh. Can you tell us what? No, go ahead.
No.
Can you tell us what was life like? I can't even imagine this. What was life like during the New York City transit strike? And you talked about all the people, and you were a kid then, and sometimes when we're children, things seem blown up or exaggerated to us. And then when we become adult, and 100 people might have looked like 1,000. Then we get older and we say, "No, it really wasn't. As much as I thought it was." Was New York City? I mean, as I said at the start of the show to our listeners, especially people who haven't been to the city, there is so much foot traffic. I can remember one of the first times that I went to New York, and I'm going back maybe 10 years. You can get caught up in that swell of that just human foot traffic during rush hour, whether people are going to work or coming home, that you can get lost. You just get caught up in a slew of bodies going in one direction.
Absolutely.
I've never seen anything like that. So was New York like that? I mean, that sea of people when you were growing up. And then, if so, what was life like during the transit strike?
Well, during the transit strike of, I guess it was 65 or it was actually 66, I was in high school. So the only responsibility I had was getting back and forth to high school. And we depended on a bus to get to high school. So it was heaven because we didn't get to high school. We had the shortest Christmas vacation that you could possibly have, but then we had 2 weeks added on. And after 1 week, everybody's mother was kicking us out the house. They said, walk, go. And it was a good walk. And so you're on your way and you're walking, and people will stop and offer you a ride. And they say, are you going up to St. Helens? Yeah, but leave us alone. We want to walk. We didn't want to get there too early. We didn't want to make it easy on ourselves. So for us, it was heaven. We had an extra vacation. Now, for my older siblings who were working, and for my father, it was tough. It was tough. They had to share rides with people, and the traffic on a good day is terrible. And when you're dealing with a transit strike like that, it's an ordeal. But in talking about how you can get caught up in the swirls, we had a frightening experience. My wife and I, we were at the lighting of the Rockefeller Christmas tree. And we were within 2 feet of each other with another friend. And all of a sudden, the tree gets lit, and people start moving about. It took us 1 hour to find each other because we got pushed in different directions. It really was frightening. So yeah, you can. You have to be aware. And the one thing I would always advise people if you're new to coming to New York is look like you know where you're going, because that always
Yeah. Even if you don't.
Even if you don't.
Almost anywhere you go, if you go travel abroad to another country, people say learn at least be able to speak basic language. That's a good way to get yourself set up for a scam, to be taken advantage of. Not just in New York, but if you travel to any other country, they're like, oh, she don't have a clue.
That's true.
So you learn something about the language and the areas where you're going before you visit. That is good advice. Now, you just shared that one experience that you had going to the Rockefeller Center, and then you and your wife got separated. And back then they didn't have cell phones either, so you really were in a jam. But can you
That's
share
correct.
with us, Jimmy, 2 to 3 other memorable historic events that you cover in A Bronx Boys Tale?
Well, naturally, the 60s were just a volatile time. And, one of the things, I could see myself in my living room. I was doing a project for school. I was a senior in high school. It was April 1968. And, of course, you have the TV on. And then, you have this bulletin come in, breaking news that Dr. King was assassinated. And you just say, my God, where are we going? What's happening in this world? It's in the middle of a terrible war that, people were so
oh my goodness
about one way or the other.
Oh.
And then, 2 months later, I guess 2 months later, my mother wakes me up for school, and I went to bed that night listening to my radio, and Bobby Kennedy had won the California primary. And she wakes me up to say that Senator Kennedy was shot. And you're just like, my God, it's, I'm 18. Well, I'm not quite 18. I'm 17 years old, and you just knew. You felt like the world was coming to an end. It really was a very, very disturbing time. It really, just thinking about it now, it was a terrible time. But one of the things that I learned in writing the book was we got through those times. And you get through those times because you have your friends, your lifelong friends. You have your family, and you have your community. And to people who are raising children today, it's easy to lose, hope when you hear the terrible things that are going on today. Well, we're going to survive this. We're even going to survive this election. It's hard to believe at this time, but I think we are.
Yeah, you know what? It's funny. I was listening to you because I was thinking about the Vietnam War. Did any of your friends, by the way, that was just, oh my God, people were moving to Canada tonight. It was just awful. I think about people I've met who were in that war. They still struggle with the haunts. Did you have any friends or anybody you knew who went?
We had, I had a couple of friends that did go. Unfortunately, they were able to return. And I think there was one or two guys in the neighborhood who were not so fortunate. So it was a terrible time. And, we all went to college. And, of course, in those days, you were given a deferment for not going, which seemed fair to us at the time, but I'm sure to those guys who didn't go to college, they bore the brunt of the war, and it was a terrible time. It really was, and I often thought, because I've talked about this with the friends who did go, I never understood how the people who were against the war, which I'm going to be honest, I was against the war. But I didn't take it out on the soldiers who fought it.
Right.
But there were those who did. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, these guys went to some place that we didn't want to go. They're not to blame, And it was such a divisive issue.
Yes. Yeah, and because people are still impacted by it. And, we always praise those who serve in the military. I know I was in the Navy. And but you even see people in the military now, a lot of them homeless. And you're like, do we really, 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 really honor them? Or is it more like using them? More like using them. Go fight this war so I can feel safe. And then when you get back, I'll just forget all about you. It's almost... It seems like, but you touched on a good point when you talked about some of the events exciting, like the Beatles and different things in the 60s. First, Elvis was hot, and then the Beatles come along, and it's like, whoa, what's going on? There was just so much change, women's rights and civil rights, and like the Kennedy and the King's assassination, and just there was just, in the Vietnam War, there was just so much going on when you compare it to today, because sometimes I today think, oh my God, what's going on? You hear about these bombings, and it's just like you think, is the world gone mad? With the 60s, if you had to look at the two and contrast them, because the 60s, there was a lot going on in the United States, would you say,
absolutely,
it was a little nuttier back in the 60s? There was just so much change going on at the same time.
And I think that's the point, because today we're used to dealing with crises of different types, whether it's economic or social or whatever. But back then, you're dealing with a nation just out of World War II, growing up in the peaceful days of the post-war era, Eisenhower, happy days, people just concentrating on getting the house, the car, and thinking about college for their children. It was a bucolic time in America. But then all of a sudden, all hell broke loose. And so that had to be a tremendous shock to people. I think today we're almost numb with the things that have gone on. Not to say
and that's
that we
unfortunate.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Does someone, Jimmy, and we're interviewing Jimmy Newell for our off-the-shelf listeners. Jimmy Newell, he's the author of the book, A Bronx Boy's Tale, and he shared some wonderful stories with us so far. I really encourage you to get the book, A Bronx Boy's Tale. But I had to ask you this. This was a question I wanted to ask you. Does someone have to be, or does a reader have to be from the Bronx to enjoy A Bronx Boy's Tale?
You don't have to be from the Bronx, and the reason why I say that is because I focus on friendship, family, and community. Now, for me, it was the Catholic Church. It's not going to be the Catholic Church for everybody else. It's not going to be Catholic schools. But for people, certainly of my generation, the baby boomers, they're going to be able to read their own life stories as I remind them with mine. They're going to remember their family. They're going to remember their heroes, their athletes. Maybe they went to Vietnam. Maybe they had the same experience of dealing with the assassinations and growing up and not knowing, where are you? What are you going to do? One of the things I focus on too is my own coming of age. Like where was I? As a kid. It took me a while to really jumpstart my academic career, and then I realized how important it was. And one of the other events I touched upon was the Kent State shootings, which was a very terrible event for the country. So I don't think you really need to be from the Bronx, but like everything else, it helps.
Okay. I like that. What has your family said when I can only imagine, they're in this story. What did your family, what have they said about A Bronx Boy's Tale?
Well, it's interesting. I'm the youngest of five. And there's in case they're listening, I don't want to oversell it, but there's a bit of an age gap between my siblings and I. So one of the first things my older sister said was, we grew up in two different families. Because now she was married when I was 3 years old.
Oh, okay.
So, and in many ways, I am closer in age to my nieces and nephews. So I really grew up with them. I feel like I'm their older brother in many ways. But they had stories of their own that I never knew about because I wasn't born. So when they read my stories, many of them were new. They didn't really have that same experience. So they kind of enjoyed it. The other thing that I did enjoy is that, unfortunately, my mother passed away before my children were born. My oldest was a baby, so she never got to know them, and they didn't get to know her. And my daughter said that by reading the book, she felt like she got to know that. Yeah.
Oh, that's
so that
sweet.
That was special. Yeah.
Yeah, that is. Oh my goodness. Now, Jimmy, we're coming down to the last 10 minutes. In what ways have you seen the Bronx change since you were coming up? When you get older.
As I indicated earlier, New York has always been the place where immigrants come. So if you went back to Leland Avenue today, you wouldn't see my family or people that I grew up with, or the relatives of those family, because we all aspired to the American dream. Get the house out in the suburbs and make your life better. You move from a small apartment to a house. So now you have another group of people, and they're from all over the world. They're from different countries in Africa. They're from some of the Caribbean islands, from West Asia, and it's interesting to see that dynamic. If you went down the block, it looks much the same, but the people are different. And that's a good thing. We all went through that. This was our port of call. This is where we wound up when our families emigrated from the various countries, whether from Italy, Ireland, or Germany, or other places in Eastern Europe, and now those people are coming from other areas. So it's really nice to see. It's actually, I think the Bronx is going to be a booming place, because different areas of the Bronx, especially the ones that were the most devastated by the decline, the urban blight, as we call it, they are maybe 15 minutes from Midtown Manhattan. Mm-hmm. So there's going to be a building boom there one day, and people will be living in the Bronx with water views and very short commutes. It's just a matter of it's starting already. Developers are already beginning the process. So,
we have a visionary. I like the way you described that. I like that. Now, Jimmy, how much digging for records, talking to family, neighbors, and friends did you have to do to create a Bronx Boys Tales? Because you could have something in your memory, and then you ask somebody else, and they're like, Jimmy, I didn't remember it that way. But how much digging did you have to do to create the book?
Well, I talked a lot with my friends and with family, and one of the things I've been blessed or cursed with is a really strong memory. Now, I may not be able to tell you what I did a week ago, but I can tell you what I did 50 years ago. I'm at that stage in life. But I do. I remembered a lot. And, a lot of my friends were concerned that I remembered too much. But I did put a lot of that stuff in the book. I have one friend who always says, thank God we didn't have iPhones or YouTube or anything of that sort.
Oh, boy, yeah. Now, where did the idea to create, this is something our other off-the-shelf listeners who have books that might really pique their interest, where did the idea to create a playlist of songs to accompany a Bronx Boys Tale come from?
Well, as I said earlier, I would go downstairs in the morning and I would go into my iTunes account and just play some music. And it brought me back to that time period. It helped me, especially dealing with the music right before the Beatles arrived, and certainly the Beatles, and all through the 70s. And listening to those songs just, kept the memories vivid. And my generation grew up with tremendous music. I guess every generation feels that way. And I wanted people to have an idea of, say, well, let me listen to this music and I'll get the feel for this book. You know. Also, I have to say, I have visions of this becoming a screenplay and a movie.
And I hope it does. I would be tickled pink because then I could say, I interviewed him.
That's right.
I interviewed that author. In what ways? Yes. Yeah. In what ways did writing A Bronx Boy's Tale, you lived the experiences, many years go by, and now you're reliving them. In what ways did writing A Bronx Boy's Tale change you as a man?
Well, I guess, I guess it's natural for many of us in this country. We're consumer-oriented, and we're always focusing on what we don't have. We want a house, and then when we have the house, we want a bigger house, or we want a newer car, or we want the newest iPhone, or whatever the consumer item is that we want. And I guess I really learned to appreciate what I had, because one of the things that I look back, as I mentioned, we lived in this very small apartment in the Bronx, but we never felt deprived. And in one of the author talks I gave, I was describing how, when I was born, there were 5 of us, and then, when I was 2, my brother joined the Marines, so that freed up a bed. So I was out of the crib and into a bed now. And then when he came back from the Marines, my sister got married, and so, it was a zero-sum loss. We were able to keep the bed situation going. I said, but for those 3 or 4 years before my brother got married, you didn't know where you were going to sleep or with whom. And somebody remarked, she said, oh, that must have been terrible. I said, terrible? It was fantastic. I said, I never felt deprived. I felt rich, because I was my family, And I had a set of trains. I had a football. I had a softball and a mitt and a baseball bat. What more could you want?
Oh.
And it really, you start to look at what was really important. And, of course, all the things that are really important have nothing to do with consumer items. It has to do with your family, with the friends, and your community.
Yes. Do you have plans to write another book, and do you see yourself ever writing a novel?
I actually had started out writing a novel, but it didn't really, as I indicated, it didn't get me anywhere. There's 2 books that I'm working on. One is just a collection of my essays that I wrote on the blog, but the other one that is, I think is going to be an important book. I'm writing it with my wife. And we have different titles, and I'll go into that. In 2000, I was diagnosed with a chronic form of leukemia. And in 2010, my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer.
Oh.
And we've gone to Cancer Survivor Days, and they're very inspirational and very, they really make you feel good. And we're both feeling well. We're both doing well. And, we're here on vacation. We're living a good life. And so we had the idea of writing what it was like to have, married with cancer, both of us. And try to get our children to share their feelings of what they went through and how we dealt with work and how we dealt with each other. And, I've learned so much from my wife and her experience, and she has some really good ideas. So we're putting that together. We're in the we've written some, and we have other things outlined. But hopefully that's going to be done. I'm hoping within the next year.
Wow, I have so enjoyed having. We've had Jimmy Newell here on, and you can hear it in his accent, a New Yorker here on Off the Shelf with us this morning. What a treat! What a treat! Jimmy Newell, he's a Bronx native, and he's the author of the nonfiction book, A Bronx Boy's Tale, which opens in November 1963, and anybody who grew up in that time knows just how much was going on in the country back then. But it's interesting to hear him say how family and your friends, it's really, that's what makes life good. So we want to encourage you to get a copy of A Bronx Boy's Tale, and he and his wife are both working on a story together, which we look forward to seeing. And one of the reviewers to our off-the-shelf listeners said that Jimmy Newell is a natural writer. I was asking him earlier if he had taken any writing courses. Well, one reviewer said he's a natural, like a natural storyteller. And you could hear that during his interview. So I encourage you to get a copy of A Bronx Boy's Tale. And I also encourage you, come back next Saturday, 11 a.m. Remember, set your calendars for Saturdays, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, to tune in to Off the Shelf, where we will continue to bring you great guests, whether they're writers, editors, literary agents, publishers, business owners, marketers, but people who have something to do with books and the wonderful world of literature. Thank you, Jimmy. And please go support him, JimmyNewell.com, the author of A Bronx Boy's Tale. And please pick up a copy of my new book, Love Pour Over Me. Remember, you are awesome. You're incredible. You're amazing. Go create a fabulous day for yourself. See you back next Saturday. Jimmy, I'll shoot you an email. Bye for now.
Thank you very much.